Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Hall. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Revigy, and I'm very excited to welcome you to the first in our 2021 Thought Leadership webinar series. Today's topic is Mission Critical Account Planning for 2021. It will be led by Joe Monastero, our Vice President of Global Sales. I'd like to just start out by informing you guys we have a Q&A option on the side, and I'll be jumping in and trying to throw Joe off with interruptions and questions throughout. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and pop them into that Q&A window. And
so
with that,
typical day-to-day that you do all the time anyways. It's good.
Right. We want to keep this natural. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Joe.
Great. Thank you guys all for joining us. As Laura said, this is our first 2021 webinar, and it is Mission Critical Account Planning for 2021. And I'm going to dive right in if my buttons want to work. There we go. So just to give you a little background on myself, as she said, VP of Global Sales here. I've held just about every position you can think of in terms of sales, from being a BDR right out of the gate when I started, up through being an individual contributor, supporting customer success teams, driving in an account management, and being on both the consulting sales and product/software sales side of the house. So, ran that up to the EVP level, and now here I sit running all that is revenue and sales for Revigy. So I know a little bit about sales and the good and bad of all of that. Today, what we're going to focus on is going to be our sales planning maturity model. We'll walk through the different stages of that model and how you can move from one to the next. We'll talk about why sales planning is mission critical going into 2021, when prior it's really been more of a nice to have, even though things can change overnight, as we've seen and continue to see this year. The framework for agile sales planning, and then most importantly, how to manage your sales planning process. Quick background, promise this is a 10-second commercial for Revigy. So based out of Atlanta, right now we're handling just over $25 billion in revenue for our clients, and we have almost 50,000 users right now across 30 countries. What we truly are at the end of the day is a purpose-built strategic sales planning and execution platform. And we'll walk through later webinars exactly what that is. And if you need any more information, want any more information about Revigy, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Jumping right into it, the sales planning maturity model. We really want to show how maturing through the sales process is truly necessary, and taking a look at how hindsight is 2020, even though we wish it wasn't with last year. So take a little bit of a look at where we started. So this started in the sales planning process is really having static documentation. Last year, everyone had their account plans, their QBRs, all of that. And it was done really as a shelf exercise or a checkbox exercise. Put your sales planning in place. Yes, you may or may not follow that. Do it to please your managers or executives, and that's about it. Secondly, we had more of a siloed approach. Sales, marketing, product, customer success, business development, working really separated from each other to drive that initiative forward, and not joining forces to be a single front to the client. Also, there was no consistency. Different groups, even different individuals within groups, had their own process or way of doing things. And that was really kind of straining how you would represent yourself to a client, especially in the world today when you see tenure being much shorter across account executives and chief revenue officers or VPs of sales for that matter. So it created this switch in the process that all of your clients really wouldn't see this consistency through. And then finally, the heavy manual lift, or as I call it, the once a quarter failure. This is when, as vice presidents or as managers, we ask our salespeople to do this massive PowerPoint to outline all of their opportunities, their accounts, how they're going to approach them, what's looking good for each quarter. And we do that once a quarter. And that ends up being exactly as I pointed out in the first step here, a static document. No one does anything with it. It's to please your executives or your operations people. And that's essentially it. Fast forward to the end of 2020 with all of that in place at the beginning. What we ended up seeing is a lot of businesses didn't make it. That model of what they were attempting to do and what had been good enough in the past actually caused failure or caused them to lose a step in their selling process. And as we know, time kills all deals. So they weren't pulling enough deals in. And unfortunately, that caused a lot of people to be really off the market now. People are trashing old strategies. They're taking what was good enough and realizing that it is not strategic, it is not efficient, and actually was riddled with inefficiencies across the board and slowing down their sales process and thereby capturing revenue at a much slower rate. Then you also have the harder to sell new clients. Looking back into what's happening this year, we can tell there's a much heavier focus on pulling revenue from existing clients and increasing wallet share as opposed to going out and tracking down new logos. I mean, it's the old adage, it's 6 times easier and 6 times less expensive to go after existing clients and upsell than it is to achieve, a new logo. And finally, we're seeing an increased buying cycle. This is really twofold. The first piece, the buying cycle is being lengthened due to having more of a buying committee in place. Many more people have to sign off. And then they're also pushing the budget cycles. So if we're going in and we traditionally seen that a sale might push a quarter or maybe 2 quarters if something happens. Now we're seeing, hey, you were in our 2021 budget cycle. Yeah, we've made some adjustments. We're going to throw this to 2022. So it really lengthens that entire process, and it becomes critical to drive the right content at the exact right time in the middle of the funnel to make sure that doesn't happen. So really what this all boils down to is it's time to capitalize on all of the changes that have happened across your individual markets and drive success where others have failed. And now you can see we have a poll that popped up, and that's why it didn't want me to click to the next thing. So if you just want to answer this real quick, we want to talk about how, or if you have a strictly enforced sales process inside of your organization. And while you're doing that, I'm going to look at a couple of studies that Harvard Business Review did. So one of which showed that businesses with a standardized sales process see about a 28% increase in revenue as compared to those who do not or have more of an ad hoc process. They also found that 50% of high-performing sales organizations have closely monitored, strictly enforced, or automated sales processes. Now, that's either done in Salesforce, through SalesLoft, or can even be done in a static document model, but it is there, and every person is driving that across the sales organization. All right. Laura, you think that was enough time for everyone to answer? Oh, yep, and it was, because it just popped up. So just to talk about the results on this real quick before we jump into the maturity model, I am seeing that 41% of the respondents are saying yes, they do have a strictly enforced process. 22% are saying no, and 37% are working on it. Interestingly enough, this actually mirrors what we did for a poll on LinkedIn. It's just about the same results, right, Laura? Yeah, so now we're going to spend a little bit more time than usual on this slide because I really want to focus here and what this looks like. So this is our sales planning maturity model. And as you can see, it goes from being immature to fairly sophisticated. And you can see the 5 different stages of maturity here. And I'll walk through these. So ad hoc, really, at the end of the day, this is an unpredictable and lumpy process. So you have your named accounts, so to speak, or accounts that you're tracking, but there's no consistency in how you're approaching them. There's no collaboration. There's no really defined steps and stages or activities to get from, research to winning an opportunity there. Second to that, you have the tactical approach. This is sometimes there are plans and there's a little bit of documentation and review around those plans. And the sales planning is driven more by the frontline manager than being ingrained across the organization and part of the organization's DNA, as you would see in a much more mature organization. After that, you have an integrated model. There's consistency in planning and execution. So you have a technology or a platform used, so it could be Salesforce even, or a CRM that you're using to drive this, and that's going to create a more consistent sales planning motion, as well as coaching from the front line and second line managers and driving that through the organization. And this is really where that switch point is, going from a much more opportunistic view, handling just deals coming in at you, transitioning to a focus on both your market share growth and wallet share growth. Then you go to intelligently manage. This is where sales plans are being used to inform revenue and planning decisions. This is how you're driving specifically to your existing clients, You're working off of a very strict process. You have activities and steps in place to align with your internal goals and your external buying or buyer's process, making sure that you're moving step by step with them through that entire process. And then finally, you have the strategic model. This is where you have collaboration across your entire internal organization. So for us here at Revigy, we do this a day in and day out. Laura and I, from a marketing and sales perspective, work hand in hand to drive this. We're then bringing that information we get from prospects back to product and customer success and creating a singular strategy moving forward to not only land customers, but retain, renew, and expand them as well and continue that process. So I want to pause here and I want to open the floor to questions that anyone has. And also we have another poll for you to answer as we're here. And Laura, are there any questions you're seeing right now?
Yep, got one right now. And just as a reminder of everybody, if you hover along the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button there. And you can ask any questions that you might have as we're going through the presentation. The first one, though, being related to, I think the last thing you're mentioning too, is how are you actually driving collaboration across the teams, especially as things, as you mentioned, are ever evolving? Good question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's two ways that we're doing this internally. One is actually with the Revigy platform. So that allows us to have a digital system that everyone can log into, see how sales planning is going, look at the research phase, look at who the stakeholders are, the strategy of our clients, and even look at and be held accountable for the execution phase of that. So that's one way. The second way is having regular syncs. I think at this point now, Laura and I have a daily meeting likely, right? But with customer success, sales, product, and marketing, we try to have at least a semi-monthly or bi-monthly type of sync where we're all sitting down looking at our strategic accounts, overlaying that on accounts that are potentially going to churn, that are coming up for renewal, ones that we want to focus on for cross and upsell, and then building that into our strategy going forward.
And I got one more coming in too about, do you separate sales planning tools from territory assignment tools?
Yeah, that is a great question. Absolutely. We get this all the time as we're going out and prospecting and bringing Revigy to the market. A lot of people, not that they mix it up, but there's really two true definitions to territory planning. One is planning how you're going to attack the territory you're given. And the second is planning how you're going to parse out or deliver that territory to your salespeople. We, on the first side of it, we can absolutely help prioritize the accounts in a territory, right? And on the other side of it, we stay away from the territory modeling exercise, who's getting what accounts. I truly believe that sales planning and strategic sales planning more specifically needs to come as a step two in that process. You really need to take a look at what your total addressable market is, break that down either by geography or by vertical, assign those to the proper people, and then take a look at prioritizing and planning the specific accounts within those territories that you've defined.
And then one last one, and we'll need to keep moving, but there'll be more Q&A opportunities. This is a great question, and we could go all day on it. Interesting, because we just did a similar exercise, but we use Salesforce, but it seems like we've overcomplicated the process. We don't know anything about that. Any tips on how to simplify?
So absolutely. Aside from starting from scratch, which is sometimes what I wish I could do, blow up our system and go back, it really is taking a look at what the critical pieces of information are that are doing two things. One, informing your salesperson of where their blind spots might potentially be, whether it's in understanding the strategy of your client, why they're even looking at your product, and articulating value based on that. The second is looking at how you can model specific pieces to understand stakeholders better than just being a line item in your contacts list. So whether it's attributing different titles to them, whether they're a specific stakeholder, an influencer, executive sponsor, budget holder, so on and so forth, or it's just aligning them properly in an org structure, even outside of Salesforce. I don't want to come back to Revigy, right? But that's really what part of what we do is. It's enhancing that data so you can actually understand where you sit within that account as you're progressing and articulating value, as opposed to just having this blanket screen of a bunch of attributes, a whole bunch of free field notes, and then information sitting there. So this is one of those questions you could really go all day on. Are there any points, Laura, from the marketing side that you want to bring up on that piece?
Yeah, I think it's really just about working with sales and understanding what they're actually using, and then not being afraid to make a change, and having a great RevOps person in place is very important. And I say RevOps versus just sales ops like we've thought about in the past, because if you have somebody that can get in there and get kind of dirty with Salesforce, that understands how both connect, that'll really help you have that person's expertise to start streamlining a lot of your processes and reporting in Salesforce as well.
Yeah, you know what? That actually brings up a great point. As we are personally transitioning from specifically a Salesforce administrator and sales operations person to a more broad revenue operations, it's having that person be strategic with the team, sit in on those cross-functional meetings, have, take their opinions and input to heart, and not just have them be a wrench turner. Having someone be extremely tactical just is not, it's a cost center. It's a piece of overhead, a cost center, isn't really driving any efficiency or success in the process. Enable them to really try to understand what's happening across the revenue portions of the organization and make the changes, or at least bring to the table the changes that they see would introduce more efficiencies, both into how you're visualizing content in your CRM and how then you're executing on that content. All right, so I will just talk about very briefly the results of this poll. So it looks like we're seeing a 38% response rate in terms of people being tactical, 14% in terms of being ad hoc. And as we move through to the integrated, intelligent, and strategic portions, roughly about 50% or 48% of the team is on the second half of that. That's actually really great. I think that's, for the audience we have here, that's above the norm for what we've seen with a lot of our prospects and what we've seen across LinkedIn as well. All right, so now we can move on. So the strategic planning framework. This is actually really interesting because this is how you're going to go from being in any of those stages that you consider yourself in now below that integrated point, moving yourselves up and filling in those gaps. So really what we've learned about account planning in 2020 is you have to have the right foundation to drive consistent success. And consistency, as you can see, it's listed in here. That's really the key here. It's making sure there's constant reinforcement and there's constant emphasis from the top down. And when I say top, that means executive to second line managers, first line managers, and through the entire team. Everyone has to be bought into this process and have some sense of ownership over it. So the first piece here is going to be transparency. And this isn't just transparency from salesperson to manager to executives. This is across the entire organization. In our personal CRM and Revigy platform, we have full access from marketing to customer success to product to sales and so on and so forth. Everyone can see the different steps we're taking to be successful in our accounts and opportunities, and even see where the inefficiencies may pop up. And they have the ability to say, hey, I've been in this situation before. You should take a look at doing X, Y, or Z to drive this customer to close. Second piece there, as I mentioned, is consistency. Making sure that the process you have put in place is two things. One is completely detailed out and every person understands why the activities and steps are being taken, what the value internally and externally is associated with each of those steps in the process, and how they can move from one step to another. And to go back to that question on Salesforce, it makes sense to have fields that are specifically locked and trigger the completion of those fields, or the moving from one sales stage to the next, triggers the need for more information. Really highlighting that fact that, hey, you need to build on what you've understood and what you've learned and continue that progress forward so you don't get stuck and end up with a stagnant opportunity. And as we're talking about tools, the digital aspect of this really just refers to have something outside of Google Docs, SharePoint, Teams documents, or just a PowerPoint living on your hard drive that is driving this plan and consistency. I cannot tell you how many times it has killed me that I will receive 10 different account plans from 10 different people, and they are 10 different formats. completely blows up the consistency aspect of it. No one's hitting on the same information, and it makes it very difficult as a manager to prioritize where you should lay your time into coaching and mentoring and which accounts or opportunities need the most attention. And that's critical, right? We all have dozens and dozens of accounts, if not hundreds, that we look after as managers and vice presidents. It's very difficult to go through all of those. It's near impossible in the amount of time that we have, which is next to none on top of everything with all the Zoom meetings these days too. So it's important to be able to very quickly prioritize and have that digital platform that lets you jump in and out and understand where the risks are and how to proactively mitigate them. That also goes to the dynamic point here, which means real-time changes take effect. If you go in and you adjust something, add a new piece of information, that digital system is going to allow that real-time change and is going to be displayed across all of the teams, again, driving back to transparency. If you haven't gotten the whole move here, this is all building on itself, which the next slide will even do more of. And then finally, it comes to agility. This actually was flipped and we had agility first because it's so important, but I moved it to the back end. You want to create all of this consistency, transparency, this singular system, but have a contingency plan. There are so many variables that shift and change throughout a sales cycle and through the life cycle of an actual account itself that you need to understand that when those variables move, how can you pivot your process to continue moving the ball down the field? Time kills all deals, as we all know. And if you drop that ball for 1 second, turn your back and a variable shifts, and you don't have a plan in place to continue forward. For instance, if you're not multi-threaded across a stakeholder organization and all of a sudden your stakeholder leaves, stops being responsive, you're dead in the water. If you have multiple people you're speaking to, that's not the case. You can pivot very quickly, introduce yourself to a new stakeholder or ask for introductions to someone else in the sales arena, in the operations arena, whatever it may be, and you get to continue that forward momentum without any really loss there. One of the big pieces of this, speaking to really the alignment with your buyers and making sure you're continuing down that line with that process and everything's kind of consistent, we're looking at kind of the Fortune 200 here in this last little bit of information. So people are going from their 3 to 5 year strategic visions, which, as we all know, over the last decade has been focused on digital transformation, to more of a 90 to 120 day set of triage projects. So that means that they're driving incremental enhancements to their processes rather than building them from the ground up. You need to take notice of that as we're selling into these organizations and really align your process with that. Be able to pivot, be agile, and understand that they're moving and shifting every 3 to 4 months. This isn't a 6-9 month sales cycle that, oh, no worries, they're looking at a 5-year vision, so we'll fit into it somewhere. These things are happening very quickly. And personally, we've actually had a couple of losses over the last year that were due to this. We had some shifts in our sales team, people left, they had some tribal knowledge that wasn't in the platform as it should have been, and we missed the boat for these opportunities, not because we weren't the best technology for the buyer. It was because we didn't respond as quickly as they needed us to, and they were already on to the next motion. That's not something you want to happen. And on to the next. Actually, you know what? I want to pause for a couple of questions on this. I know I wasn't planning on doing that, but this is a lot of information to digest, and it really does set the foundation for being successful in filling the gaps to move from one stage to the next. So are there any questions on this specific slide?
Well, give him a second to type questions. We did have one that I think you spoke to right as he was asking it. Nigel was asking how you balance standardization and flexibility that some of the complex sales cycles demand. It might be helpful to have an example that we have from a real world. And I know you're going to talk a little bit about it on the next slide too, but keeping all of the revenue teams aligned so that marketing can make the pivot at the same time that sales is seeing the change, or vice versa, or customer success even.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And this is something that comes up with almost all of our clients. And it's around the issue of, hey, I know I'm bringing people into this organization that have maybe been here for 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, and I have others that have been here for 5 to 7 years. Their process or the way they like to do things is never going to be the same. So I like to call it driving creativity through constraint. You constrain people to a set of activities or steps through the sales process that you know as an executive or as a team for your company that drive success with your opportunities, with your account planning, whatever it may be. That's the first step. The second is to understand that people who have been there for 5, 10 years or more are going to do things their own way. And you just want to make sure that they're checking those boxes, doing those activities and being successful in that manner. But it gives you something to go back on. So if that person that's been there forever is missing opportunities, not converting at the right rate, you can take a look, because you're tracking that properly, back and say, all right, well, you're missing these 3 or 4 steps that we've deemed as being critical to success. Let's really try to focus on getting those done and drive that forward. On the front end of that, that constraint is driving the new salespeople or short-term salespeople to level up their approach and really you're going to end up meeting in the middle, having your new people be very successful out of the gate, ramping at a much faster rate. And the people that have been there for a while are having a reinforcement of the steps and activities you want them to take to be successful.
And another kind of related to what you were just ending on too is, how do the tools stay agile?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. And not all tools do stay agile. A lot of companies still work with that waterfall approach where they're dropping new functionality in or enhancements, maybe every 6 to 12 months, sometimes even longer. It's really important to choose tools that can bend and flex with you. As soon as you spot an inefficiency in your process, you need to be either able to go to your administrator in-house and say, hey, look, we need to remove this step, this activity, this piece of functionality because it doesn't serve the greater good of winning these deals, or go back to the organization that you're partnered with and say, excuse me, Mr. Vendor, I need to remove this piece of functionality because it's actually slowing us down, or I need you to create an enhancement here to drive this success further forward. And that's really where the customer success portion of the organization comes in, and where that collaboration is key, both externally and internally.
Yeah, I just added that too, about not being afraid to go back to the vendor and asking for either a refresh or a QBR from your CSM there, or your account manager. And that's really helpful. It's something, we've gotten asked to do. It's something I've asked vendors to do personally as well, especially as you have new members of the team and you just need that overview. Speaking from experience, we're always happy to do things like that. We want you to see value.
So, we just did that with Terminus, ZoomInfo, and SalesLoft today. Right? We just finished setting those meetings up for our teams because it really is important. Things change very quickly. And they're still focusing on being agile and pivoting as well. So it's really important to constantly refresh yourselves.
Mm-hmm. And one last question, I know we have to get to the next slide, but when you talk about 5-year planning versus 100-day planning, how do you manage that? It's a difficult shift.
Yeah, it really is. So and we worked through that personally this year. We had sales cycles that were, some of them were 2-3 year sales cycles. And really what we found out when we peeled back that onion and dug into that information, and Laura and I did a lot of that, it was that we weren't focusing ourselves on people who were ready to buy. We were focusing on people that were interested. They might be ready to buy one day. They had an initiative they thought might go on over the next 2 to 3 years. But it's really understanding within your ideal client profile, which buyer personas are going to be the ones who buy, which are going to be the ones that do the research, and how do you bring those together to understand what is that critical step, that activity, that movement, or that score, if you're using a marketing platform or an ABM platform, that's going to say to you or your salespeople, this person's ready to buy. And it's really focusing or aligning yourself to those different actions and scores to then approach the buyer and drive that way. That's the way we do it internally. Laura, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that too. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I think that's it. And providing your salespeople with help. And if you need to, a lot of times we're scared. We have a sales process in place, a methodology in place that's worked for the last 5 years, but we've never experienced a year like 2020. And I think it's permanently shifted the way that people buy. We've understood that a digital transformation doesn't need 2 years to take place. It can actually take place in 48 hours in some instances. So don't be afraid to change up your sales funnel, your sales process, or even switch methodologies or customize what you've got.
Yeah. The other thing, just to caveat that, is ask. That's the easiest way to do it. If you feel something off, and we all know, right? We've been in this game long enough. We've worked with enough clients to understand when things are shifting and changing and there's a variable that's moving. Ask the question. It's critically important, and we do this internally, to use all of your account plans, your relationship maps, whatever it might be that you have at your disposal that you're building for your executives. Validate that information with your clients. create a close plan, understand what their visions are, how they're shifting their internal agility or development to better serve their clients. And that's going to help you work with them more readily and really not have any of those issues. Anything else on this, or are you ready to move on?
I think we're ready to move to the next slide.
I think we really have to at this point too, so that's good. So really, this is taking a look at how you can step through this process and really drive all the way through the account plan and into the execution portion of this. And I'm going to not really read through all of these. I don't want to bore you to death, as I'm sure I already have from talking so much, but we'll take a step through these. So first on this is the account research aspect. And there's a couple ways you can do this, right? This is if you have an existing account, you're digging deeper into what they're doing from a strategic perspective, driving discovery calls with your existing stakeholders, or you're doing your research on from an ABM perspective. What are the key accounts or top accounts that we want to approach? What's important about them? What does their letter to the shareholders say, their financial reports, whatever it may be? Look at what their strategic initiatives are for the next 6 to 12 months. And remember, those are going to be broken down into those 60 to 120 day or 90 to 120 day chunks. So it's important to outline that and know that's a question you have to ask later. From that, you should be able to distill down what their specific near-term objectives and goals are. What's driving them to be, what is driving success for them in the coming year? What are they defining as success? And really what's keeping them up at night, so to speak. That can actually be flipped with relationship mapping in certain cases. I know personally myself, I like to understand who the players are before I'm attaching objectives and goals to that. But many of my salespeople and the people on the team at Revigy like to understand the goals and objectives first and then attach the players. But when you're looking at the relationship mapping, who are your stakeholders? And understand the attributes to a deeper level, not just who are the players that could control budget, who pulls the purse strings from a political level, who's doing it from a C level that's driving this down, who is influencing your C-level executives, your executive sponsors, your stakeholders to make decisions. Is there a third-party consultant in there? Do we need to try to impress them? What motivations are we playing on, whether they're political, personal, or professional? Sorry, too many P's. All of that driving forward. And what does that all look like? And really the critical portion here is to attach those relationships and stakeholders to the objectives and goals. Know what everyone's motivation is. Know what's keeping them up at night and really what they're going to see as value. And I know it sounds old. It's the old adage of sell to the right people at the right time and present the right information, but that is absolutely critical to expanding on your existing accounts and really even winning new logos now. Just a small tidbit, we know that 80% of the sales cycle is already done before a customer even reaches out to you. They know what they want to buy. They understand what the value propositions are. They know what it's going to solve for them. It's up to us to introduce deeper information, help them recognize blind spots and pitfalls that they didn't even know were there, and then show that, look, we aren't just trying to sell you something. We really do want to partner with you and drive that trusted advisor relationship. And that really works into the solution portion of this, which is developing a potential solution for them that fits their specific needs. I've actually studied solution selling and design-led solution selling very heavily over the last 5 to 7 years. And what's interesting about this is people see solution and they think, oh, I need to introduce a technology right away. No, that is failure, and you die on that hill, definitely. It's more of what challenges are you solving? What pains are you alleviating? How are you positioning your offerings and services to do that? And then build in the technology underneath. Every solution that we're presenting needs to be unique to that specific customer, but even more so to that buyer persona and the group within that client who's purchasing it. We know personally that we have groups using Revigy for just account management, for account management opportunity execution. Customer success teams are on it. Some teams pull in the product side of the house to even drive an understanding and success across their account portfolios. So it's very different as you walk into each of these organizations. And then finally, it's an account-based execution plan. All of these different steps are driving you to a place where you know exactly which activities to take, exactly who to speak to when, and the value to articulate to bring this deal down the field and win it. And you really just need to align on that path forward internally and externally and get buy-in from your client and your stakeholders. That is critical. make sure that they agree with you. They say, yep, those are our pain points. Yes, those are your people you need to talk to. And those are the different steps you need to take to get that signature at the end of the day. If you've done all that, it is very unlikely that you are going to lose that opportunity, because they're willing to share that information with you and validate that you are moving down the right path. Now, it's not to say that something like last year can't happen. Things get shifted, budgets get lost. But again, that goes back to the point of being agile. Know when to shift and when to change direction. And we have one more poll for you that you can jump into and show which of these you're currently doing. So you can actually choose multiple of these items in here. And we would expect or hope that you are. And Laura, while they're doing that, this is another spot we want to pause for questions. So if there's anything in the question tab, or if you have any questions, please feel free to ask those now.
I was about to say, we do have one question, and if anybody would like to submit more, I think we're kind of coming towards the end of the slides too, so we can move a little bit slower. This one, how do you manage the change and get to a place where you have a sales process that's actually embraced and followed by the sales org?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I've actually talked about this a lot lately with some of my colleagues, and it's funny because you see the tenure of SVP, VP, EVP type of player shrinking. It used to be 2 years to 2.5 years. It shrank to 18 months, and now you're seeing on average that it's 12 to 14 months. And there's one critical piece that I believe these people are not doing when they walk in the door. They're going right in, guns blazing, breaking glass all over the place, not understanding that they don't even recognize what might be broken and what's working. I tend to take a step back, analyze what's existing in front of you, understand the efficiencies and the inefficiencies in the current process, interview your salespeople, your marketing people, your customer success teams, understand what the leaders across the organization are doing, and then build a plan from there. If you really want buy-in from all of your teams from a cross-functional perspective, including your own personal account managers account executives, managers, and other players on the sales team, you need to have their buy-in, and they need to help build that process. So doing those interviews, asking them those questions, having them feel a sense of ownership for what that final product is, that's going to get the buy-in, and it's really going to spread across the organization. The other piece, have that sales process be part of your DNA at your organization. It needs to be just constantly screamed from the rooftops that this is the way we do things. There's reasons behind it. Support it with data, show the detail, and call out the successes of your team when they happen.
It looks like we have the poll results, but just real quick, one question too. I have somebody wondering, in the companies that you speak to, how often are people following all of these steps all the way through to collaborating with other people in the organization?
Oh, that's easy. Never. Literally, no, rarely. It's interesting. They're all doing pieces and parts of the broader kind of account execution or account planning and execution process. But it's very seldom that they are mature enough that every single person is following all of these steps and they're collaborating in a transparent way. And Laura, you talk to just as many people as I do about this. Would you agree with that?
Yes, 100%. I think it's inevitable though. And if you can start getting to that point now, you're going to be so far ahead of the game because, I mean, we've talked about ABM, or Joe's mentioned it several times throughout this, but what we're really working towards is ABX, and it can't be marketing in a vacuum, sales in a vacuum, and CS in a vacuum. If you can start having those conversations and putting things in place right now to enable collaboration, you're going to be head and shoulders above your competitors.
Yep, absolutely. And April actually just called out something very specific, is even when people are doing all of these different steps, there's a lack of consistency there. And that's very true. It may be on a specific account, they see it as one of their lighthouse accounts. So they're following the step in detail down to the granular level. And then another deal might come in, or another account comes in that they don't consider as strategic, and they're skipping steps all over the place. And that inconsistency just breeds failure. Unfortunately, and you're losing deals, missing opportunities because there's not that control and collaboration across the board.
Yep. All right, David. Who typically owns the process, sales or marketing, and who should own it? And then he had a follow-up. Please don't say both.
So unfortunately, it is both, but I'll tell you, it starts with sales. Sales needs to work with marketing to define what that process is, but look, the two pieces are different halves of the same coin. So most companies you'll see, sales and marketing, at least the ones that I've been, have awful relationships. Sales feels like marketing is a slave to whatever they need. Marketing feels like they never get the information from sales in terms of what they're talking to prospects about to actually create valuable collateral and content. And they also feel like sales, not to mention, doesn't really help them, but doesn't even push webinars out, so to speak. Not that this is exactly what we're doing now, right? But they don't push the invites out, nothing, and they're not supporting each other. Realistically, sales owns the process from the inception of a lead. When the salespeople say that, hey, this lead is something that we can work with and it's been passed over from marketing, that forward through close is owned by sales. On the front end of that, so the top of the funnel down, that's owned by marketing. They need to define what that lead process looks like, what the qualification process looks like. You have a synergy there across the business development team that marketing, business development, and sales need to work together to see what those handoffs are to make sure they're smooth and no information is lost. And on the back end of that, when you're crossing over from a closed deal or a signed deal into customer success implementation, marketing needs to be there again too, driving the referenceability of that client, which we just found out is not a real word, but in approval right now in the dictionary, but driving that with the client to make sure that we can call on that reference to come back to the beginning of that sales process or the mid funnel and help support the growth of new accounts and new opportunities.
One more in here. What are the behaviors of the most successful teams and individuals?
That's interesting. So I can answer this in one word, and it's vulnerability. And it's weird that I say that, but it's the truth. It's understanding that we all have our strong points and our weak points, and using the team members around you to shore up your weaknesses, strengthen your strengths, and really create this united front against the customer. I will tell you, I could not do any of this by myself, not without my team, not without the marketing team, customer success, product, so on and so forth. Yeah, I'd be, fairly dangerous out there on my own, but there's no way that I could produce an entire, through this process that we're looking at right now, all of the research, the objectives and goals, relationship solutions, all the way through the execution plan and drive that by myself. It really is that collaboration, consistency, and willingness to admit when you don't know everything. That's heavily important. And Laura, I'll put that to you too, because we work hand in hand on a lot of this stuff.
You're right. I was not expecting you to say vulnerability.
No, it's true though.
You heard it here first, guys. A sales leader said vulnerability. I think it was spot on though. It's that transparency and knowing when to ask for help. And you can't be a hero. And if you try to be a hero, you're going to drop a ball somewhere, and you need to know which balls are glass and which balls bounce, and who can help you in your juggling process. So I think that vulnerability / collaboration is exactly what I would have said.
Yeah, and I will add that especially in the startup or startup 2.0 phase, that is even more critical, because there aren't that many people to catch those balls that you drop. We're all wearing multiple hats, trying to drive forward at the speed of light right now. And if you're not aware of where your weaknesses are or where you need help, you're going to fail.
Yeah, I would say even beyond that too, as there's an uptick in mergers and acquisitions as well as you're combining teams. You're going to have to put your cards on the table, right? Somebody's got to start, somebody's got to go first. So otherwise you're going to have a lot of blind spots down the line, and it's going to trip you up.
Absolutely. All right. So just real quick poll results. It looks like from an account research perspective, 75% of the respondents are doing that. Objectives and goals is coming in second with, relationship maps coming in second with 71%, objectives and goals at 67%, solutions at 63%. And what's interesting is less than half, 42%, said that account-based execution plans are something they're doing. And that does make sense, because this is all building to that execution plan. But I will tell you, that's probably the most critical part. Having a plan that you can actually drive and execute on is the fastest way to achieve success and growth across your strategic accounts. Right. We will go on to the next one. So a little bit about where we start. And this is kind of a jump off point for what we're going to talk about in future webinars that are around this sales maturity model, how you understand where you are today, how you fill gaps, but really driving a sales methodology into what is strict and rigid, more into a flexible playbook. Not all sales are the same. Not all salespeople are the same. Not all accounts are the same. You need to have flexibility built into that rigidity of the normal sales methodology to be successful in your own right. Coaching on the process, consistently and constantly reinforcing what the steps and stages are, what the activities are that align with those, and why they're necessary, that value piece. Salespeople as a whole, and I say this for myself too, are lazy. We don't want to do more than what we have to do. I mean, it's hard enough to get a sales guy to fill out an expense report, let alone fill in an execution plan that they don't immediately see the value for. So constantly reinforcing what the value is, why those steps are necessary, are going to help you. It's going to help you out a lot in that buy-in process. Removing silos. Everyone that is in your organization is in sales, from customer success to product, to even development, all the way from the CEO on down. Everyone is selling. They all are having one point or another some type of interaction with the customer, and it's highly important that gets articulated to marketing, to the sales team, and we're able to build out that collaborative approach. Singular sales message. It was right the first time. So this is that account-based experience aspect, right? You want one message to go from the marketing messaging that's pulling someone from the top of the funnel in, from the BDR's mouth to the salesperson's mouth, from implementation and professional services to customer success, and back through that cycle for the retain, renew, and expand aspect of it. That's extremely important. And that's something we actually focus on heavily, especially in the last 6 months now here at Revigy. And finally, agility. And this is a little bit of a different type of agility than what we talked about before. You need to sell how your customers are buying. That's that 90 to 120 day tactical cycle that they're in right now. It's aligning yourself to their buying process, understanding how they're evaluating vendors, why they're evaluating vendors, and how that all really fits together. So constantly being able to shift your process to lengthen or shorten it to fit the needs of your buyer. And now we can stop for questions. More questions.
All right. Well, we let those come in. One question I've been asked several times is, will we get a recording? Yes. Give us 24 hours to get everything edited and put on a landing page, but it will be there in your inbox in the next 24 hours. First question up. This is fun. Let's give you your wish list. What would your ideal sales tech stack look like to drive towards maturity in sales planning? And don't just say Revigy.
Revigy is definitely going to be a component of it, right? But so I think you have, if I'm looking at what we have today, because a lot of that's in there. So I'm going to even call out some names for you guys. So we're using Zoom Info from a BDR and research perspective. It lets us drill into intent data, all of that. So it's really helpful. We're also stacking on top of that G2 Crowd, which allows us to have really different type of intent data based on research and understanding of where customers are trying to go. From an account-based marketing perspective, we're using Terminus. So that's a great play there to have one of those platforms in to truly target your one-to-one messaging, your one-to-few, and your one-to-many. We break that into different tiers. So that's really below. You have your CRM that sits in the middle there. So all of that data is feeding into CRM. And CRM I treat it a little bit differently. It's kind of the living dead for me. It's necessary, but I can't stand it, as I'm sure you all agree. So we're using Salesforce today, but Microsoft Dynamics, SAP C4C, Siebel, Zoho, all those out there, similar function. It's a repository for historical data and information on leads. Sitting above that, having a sales loft or a sales engagement platform to drive out cadences and have an understanding of how you're interacting with those leads and driving them deeper into the pipeline is critical. And then I think for us, having Revigy sit over the top that drives that consistency, reinforces your sales motion, and allows for you to deepen or enhance your knowledge about your clients, their stakeholders, and what their strategies and goals are. That's absolutely critical. And I don't know, Laura, if you would add anything else to that, but I think that's really the wish list for me.
Yeah, I think you hit them all. I'm trying to see if you missed anything else. Any kind of like marketing automation tool, you need to have that as well that feeds into Salesforce so that sales can understand those touches. But that's along the lines of some of the other tools you mentioned, like
Yeah, Marketo,
Venezuela.
Pardot, that type of stuff.
Mhm.
The one thing that we've actually recently talked about that we're looking at rolling in is a Sendoso or something like that that lets you send specific gifts or marketing content materials to some of your higher level prospects. And that really goes hand in hand with your ABM piece of technology there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's another way that sales can get involved with it as well. Of course, marketing can use those platforms, but it's really nice for a salesperson to send out before a call or after, or if somebody has a birthday or has gotten promoted. It's always nice to be recognized for things like that. I've been the beneficiary of a few of those, and it's always made me feel special.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'm going to save a couple of the lighter hearted questions, which I very much appreciate. But David had another question. He was the one earlier that asked about the ownership between sales and marketing and the process. He said, same question, different way. This process looks like a great collaboration tool between biz dev and sales. So do your most successful companies have BD reporting into sales or marketing?
That's actually something we struggled with early on in my time at Revigy. They were originally reporting into marketing, and I quickly pulled that over to the sales side. I personally believe that it needs to be aligned with sales and have a light touch by marketing, right? Because that information, the messaging they're pushing out is specifically coming from marketing, but the majority of their plays, their cadences, what they're developing is mostly focused towards sales and toward building that front end of the pipeline or kind of entry into the funnel. So that's really how I see it set up. And with our clients, it's really a mixed bag. I would really throw it up as 50-50. Half of them have it reporting into marketing and have success there, and they're really building the kind of customer success function into that as well. And the other half are having them report into sales, and I've never seen a lack of success there either. Laura, I know you probably have some input on that as well.
Yeah, I'd say what I've seen, the questions are cracking me up, guys. I'd say what I've seen as best practices, or not best practice, but what I've seen most commonly in the marketplace is a 40-60 marketing ownership versus sales ownership. I know, as a marketing leader, I should want to own as much as possible, but I agree with Joe, and I don't think that marketing should own the business development team. And there's one simple reason above all else too. A BDR or an SDR, what do they want to do next in their career path? They want to become account managers or sales directors. They want to be in field sales or even move up into inside sales. And I can't provide them a path for that through marketing. Obviously would love it if they would love to come over to the marketing side of the house. But it just makes more sense for them and in their collaboration in order to be more effective and establish that sort of mentorship relation too with some of your account teams. It just makes more sense.
Yeah, and in a way to really understand that and define it is through professional development conversations. We have some of our business development folks here that have been doing it for a while, love it, that they want to transition into more of a customer advocacy role or customer marketing, specifically a customer marketing role. That's great for them, and that's that transition. So you align them more heavily with marketing versus sales. So it could be both. I mean, you can really have both groups heavily influenced, especially if there's a good relationship between sales and marketing.
Yep. Another one, this is a really interesting question. Currently, we have onboarding under sales to make that transition smooth and lower churn in onboarding. What are your thoughts on this?
That's really interesting. I love that approach. So we have actually created our onboarding documentation, our onboarding playbooks, the checklist, everything has been generated by sales and then shored up through Dropbox. What is it? Dropbox paper, right? With an entire kind of company inventory of data information. It's really what did we call it? Our product repository. Product university. There it is. Through paper. And that came from product. So I love having sales control that. We're the ones that like to talk the most. We have the most detail and information about the products, the offerings that the company has. And it's a great way to introduce your new hires to kind of the fastest moving portion of the organization and get them comfortable with how things are shifting, what the messaging is, and then have them layer into their role in a really simple transition. So I love that aspect and really think that's a great idea.
It helps make sure none of those balls are dropped. You don't want somebody to have a bad onboarding experience.
Or no onboarding experience. That's never good either.
Exactly. All right. So Jenny, I'm a CSM for a Series A startup with a small sales team of 3 and still truly defining our market position and key stakeholders. What's your best advice as to where to start with account planning to set us up for success when we become a team of 15 And then she also had another question that I'm really curious what your answer is, Joe. She also wants to know if we can actually get a bourbon recommendation.
Of course. I mean, there's a whole bunch of it over there that I can always talk about afterwards. So absolutely about that. That's an enjoyable little side hobby I have. But so on your first question there, so there's a really simple answer to this, and it's great. The first piece out of everything is work with your marketing team and your sales team to really define what your ideal client profile is. Then from there, you're going to want to define what your specific buyer personas are that you're targeting and the messaging that lives within that. And then you'll be able to step into your sales motions and grow those as the teams grow. But you still have that base level foundation of what companies you're going after, who you're speaking to within those organizations, and why it's important. Then what you can do is, from all of that experience up front, you can build really a repository or a database of what their typical motivations are, what values that they're seeing in your product, how they're associating themselves in the buying process. All of that's there. I think that's a real kind of quick answer to that. Is there anything else, Laura, that you want to add from there?
I think those are great points. And I was just going to offer, Jenny, we can commiserate on bourbon too, but I'm more than happy to share with you what we've done. And, I'm 4 or 5 months into my role at Revgy too. And we changed up and built out a lot of that stuff. So if you ever want to just talk one-on-one about some of it, I'm happy to help out.
Yeah.
All right, 1 minute left. So let's start wrapping it up. There's a final kind of fun question too. Both Nigel and David had a beard related question. What made you grow a beard and how soon can you shave it?
I got lazy and no, Dave, I'm not shaving it. No, honestly, I'd never grown one, and I had that patchy Italian beard when I was younger, and I was like, maybe it will grow, and it did, and now it's sticking around. No, but honestly, so we got the slide up here. If you guys have any questions, comments, or even just want to talk through some of what this process looks like, my whole take on selling is that you don't want to do it in initial conversations. I'd far prefer to have a conversation with you about what you're doing in your organization and how we can help you better that, not even through our technology, but just through our experience. So please feel free to reach out to myself, to Laura, or anyone on the Revgy team, and they'd be happy to help you do that.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Hope to see you on the next one as well.